Hello and good afternoon or good noon. I am Janie Buckland with the West Virginia Few Families United for Education, and I am talking today with my good friend John England from out in Utah. John, thanks so much for making some time today to talk. We're excited to introduce you to our audience. So let's just jump right in. If you would, get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are now as this policy wonk expanding school choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Jamie. It's always good to talk to my friend.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm John England. I am currently the education policy analyst at the Libertas Institute here in Utah. We do policy work similar to the Cardinal Institute there in West Virginia. But I'm also a former elementary teacher and principal. And I've always just gotten into education because I wanted to help kids, reach their full potential. And that has been a journey. I started out as a teacher thinking, hey, I want to help kids. And so I went teaching. I was teaching in low income schools. And then I moved to become a principal because I figured I could have a little bit more influence as a principal. And then along that journey, I decided that, the policy side is the best place where I can really empower parents, which is the goal of what I have, because parents know their children best. And so that's kind of how I got from A to B. And here I am.
And so, precursor to capital A, you are a Marine,
Yes, I
correct?
am. Yes, I
Yeah.
am.
So, tell us
I
a
am
little
the
bit
part
about.
of the few, the proud, the Marines, not the few, the proud, West Virginia.
That's
So
right. That's right. My dad is a Marine, so I have to throw out that acknowledgement. So, tell us a little bit about what that looks like. How does one come out of hoorah and into the classroom?
well, and honestly, I started out as a reservist, so I didn't go full active duty when I was in the Marine Corps, but I joined it right out of high school. I did it because it was a way for me to pay for college
Sure.
and continue my education. But I also wanted to beat my brother who was in the Army, and so that's
That does it.
and so I went to the Marine Corps because they're tougher,
Yeah.
and I always let him know that. So that's kind of what I did, and so I actually started out in college and worked with my dad, who does independent living specialist for people who are coming out of prison or things like that. And he walked me through a similar process, and I found out, hey, I really like learning, and I really like being able to help people, and teaching is a way that I can continue to learn and help people. So
What did it look like in the classroom? Were you elementary, secondary? Where were you as a
I
teacher?
was an elementary teacher, and yeah, so I taught upper elementary, fifth graders, sixth graders here in Utah. Fifth and sixth grade are in the elementary schools, and so that's why I taught. I love teaching fifth grade, especially. That's when we got into U.S. history, and being a former military guy, U.S. history is really important to me. Marine Corps. They really do have a big emphasis on their own personal history. The Marine Corps hymn is laced with the history of the Marine Corps throughout it. Talking about the halls of Montezuma to
Right.
the shores of Tripoli, and everything that the Marine Corps has done is and so that history had a special place in my heart. And so being able to teach U.S. history, having my background was amazing.
I love that. My youngest, my Easton, was born on November 10th, the
Oh, very
birthday of the Marine Corps. So my dad celebrates, the birthday of the Marine Corps, and then secondary celebrates that youngest grandkid that falls in place there. So would you say then that history was your favorite subject to teach?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Actually, math, I'm more of a math guy. I really enjoyed teaching math, but I loved having the history there, and getting into the discussions of why our nation is the way it is, and how it got there. But I'm more of a math and science guy when I was teaching. And so I'm actually currently homeschooling some of our children. I have 5 kids, and 2 of them are full homeschooled, kind of that elementary age. And then I have one that's going to a micro school, actually. But I still teach her the math, just
Awesome.
because I love it so much.
And so what did it look like going from the classroom to the principal's office, to the guy leading? And were you a principal again in elementary or high school, middle school?
Yep, everything I did was in elementary.
Okay.
So that was a shock, actually. That's when I really started to notice the politics around education, and things like that. So even within a district, there's certain politics that go in, but I really started to see the influence of what the legislature does, and then you have the state board who comes in and makes rules, and then your local board will make rules. And by the time it gets down to a classroom teacher, they can actually be pretty restricted in what they can and can't do, which makes it really tough to maybe do what's right for kids. So
Yeah.
that was a tough transition. I'll be honest, I didn't love being a principal as much as I loved being a teacher. So
How long were you a principal?
so I was a teacher for 7 years, and then I was a principal for 7 years. So I did them both the same amount of times. I was an assistant principal for 2 of those 7 years. But yeah, as a principal, I definitely had to go out and find the kids to work with and the joy. Whereas as a teacher, they just show up every day in my classroom and I can help them there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then what did it look like coming out of the school building, out of the principal's office? Because I've only been in a principal's office for things everyone can imagine. I mean, I was frequently in the principal's office throughout elementary, middle school, high school. Shocking information for anyone who knows me. But so what did it look like for you coming out and joining into this policy world?
Yeah, it was refreshing, actually, because one of the things that I've loved about working at Libertas is I really have been able to focus on helping parents find the right education for their children. And we do that through our policy work, but we're also able to help find some stories and highlight them, and think about just different things of what does this look like for a parent. And that is an important aspect of, I think, education. And any teacher will tell you that parental involvement is a major indicator into the success of the child.
Yeah.
And so what I liked is the policies we're all working on, like, really emphasize parental involvement. So,
Yeah. And so when did that transition take place? How long have you been?
about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago. So last January is when I changed from being a principal to going uh, into the policy world, and
Yeah.
getting to meet amazing people and travel across the country to different events, and talk about some of the cool things that are happening in education right now.
What would you say if you had to like reduce it down to maybe like the top 3 issues when you were making that transition? Like you're coming out of a space where you said like you're identifying issues, and now you actually want to have a platform or a position to help address those issues. What would you say were like your top 3 things that you thought, all right, I'm going to go into policy and I'm going to try to address these issues? What were they?
So I think parent empowerment, and that can happen through things like an ESA, like you have the Hope Scholarship there in West Virginia. Utah just passed the Utah Fits All Scholarship, which is very similar to the Hope Scholarship. I mean, a lot of people will have that conversation of whether or not we should be paying for a parent's private choice of where they go to school. And that's an argument that I'm willing to have with anybody, but I believe that the public money is for public education, not necessarily for a public system. And being able to help families be able to find the right education for their children was something that was really near and dear to my heart. And on that journey, I learned about this amazing new thing from Kerry McDonald called micro schools. I'm like, what is a micro school? I've been in education for 14 years. I've never heard of a micro school. What is that? So I started digging in, and these are, as Kerry McDonald will say, low cost, low tuition private schools with really small student bodies, usually around 75 to 100 if they're doing well. Sometimes they're like 10 to 15 kids, but they're across the board, and they can really be specialized in either curriculum or maybe a certain issue that a child's dealing with. So you can find one that deals specifically with autism, or maybe you find one that deals with ADD, or is built around science as this background, and just really digs into those things. And so micro schools has been just an amazing thing that I've discovered in the last year and been working on. And the thing I love about micro schools is it provides choices for teachers too. Because across the nation, one of the things that I've noticed as I've gone to places like Atlanta, South Florida, talked to Kerry McDonald a couple of times, and there's things going on in Kansas. Most of the people who are starting these small schools are actually former public school teachers. because they just want to be able to go in and build the classroom, get out of that bureaucracy that I talked about that I ran into as a principal, and be able to build the classroom that they dreamed about when they graduated from college. And that has been just absolutely amazing. So I know that wasn't 3 things, that was 2 things, but those 2 have been my absolute favorite things and really been my focus this last year.
I think we do have 3 because I'm thinking, our work out here in West Virginia, we like our mission, our mantra is that we're removing barriers and guiding parents and supporting providers through the transformation of K-12 education in the Mountain State. And when I'm hearing you talk, you're talking about really providing parents with their options, the information they need. And then the micro schools, is part of that expansion of choice. But then for me, your 3rd piece really is coming alongside that educational entrepreneur and making sure that they understand their access, because this is really all about access. When we're expanding options, we're really opening up access to new opportunity. And so that sounds like what you guys are doing. So now tell us how you're doing that, because it sounds like you're days away from retirement, like you've accomplished what you need to do this session. So tell us a little bit about what's happening in this session in Utah.
Yeah, well, so just a few weeks ago, Utah passed the Utah Fits All. We passed it with a 2/3 supermajority, so it won't go to referendum like it did in Arizona. And so that is amazing. It got signed by the governor, and so that's a done deal. It's coming. The likelihood, you guys know, in West Virginia, there'll probably be some lawsuit because, the unfortunate reality is there are some opponents to these programs, and they really just try any way they can to get them to stop. But so we got that passed, and right now I'm currently working on a micro schools legislation bill to really reduce their zoning and occupancy restrictions that makes it really difficult for some of these micro schools to get up off the ground. They typically end up in places like strip malls or old office buildings, and then the education entrepreneur has to come in and do tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of renovations to make it suitable to an education occupancy as opposed to just a regular business occupancy like they had before. And so they'll have to add things like maybe an updated sprinkler system or more bathrooms or these types of things that don't necessarily make sense for what they're trying to do in the school. Sometimes they're in church buildings. A church will decide that they'll rent out part of their building for during the school week, but because the church is under one occupancy, which is usually a class B or business occupancy, they have to make modifications because it wasn't built to have children in them. Although a lot of churches have little Sunday school classrooms that were built for children, and so a lot of things that just don't make sense. And so those are the things we're working on. That bill passed actually through the Senate Education Committee yesterday to reduce those barriers. And so now it will go to the Senate floor and from there to the House committees and then the House floor. So we're really hopeful with what it can do and what it will look like here by the end of the session. But I talking with you and talking to people like Kate Baker, I also understand that no, I can't just go into retirement and kick my feet back up, that there's going to be a lot of work of helping parents to navigate the upcoming choices that they have, helping entrepreneurs to get up off the ground and build these micro schools so that there is a robust system of choices that they have is something that we'll be doing.
Yeah. And when we're talking about, the transformation, like there's just so many moving parts, right? Like the particulars to the universals is what I like to say. Like you have this universal policy change, but then when you get into implementation, there are just so many particulars, and every preposition actually matters, that's written into that policy, because then it actually affects the lives of the families and the people on the ground that are having opportunity expanded through those policy changes. But when we're doing this work, it's exciting. You talked a little bit about communications earlier in like painting a picture for people, because there are all these partial solutions that we get to work towards. And that means looking at what the user experience is for parents.
Yep.
for kids, individualizing education, like you talked about. It's different for a single tutor who's just going to do music lessons or PE instruction at the YMCA, whatever. And then moving on to micro schools or even for private schools, what type of change do you feel like your the Utah Fits, the ESA, what type of change do you envision seeing over these next 3 to 5 years once it gets off the ground and we're in the implementation mode? What type of change do you expect to see?
Well, and one of the things that I've seen is, you look at a place like Florida or Arizona, West Virginia. I believe this is happening there, but you know better than I do. But when you get something like an ESA passed, you do get a influx of innovation coming in because the economics starts to work out a lot better. A lot of these education entrepreneurs are competing with the government and their quote unquote free system,
Yep.
right? And because that's already paid for through tax dollars, it becomes really difficult to compete with them. You're asking somebody to pay for something that they can just go down the street and get already. So you either need to provide something that's amazing and better, or something that's affordable, really affordable. And so having something like the Hope Scholarship there in West Virginia makes it a little bit easier for these education entrepreneurs to get up off the ground and provide the education that they want to provide, while not having to worry so much about whether or not they can pay the bills.
Right. Yeah. And so building on that, for your family, you guys are homeschooling. What is this going to look like? What type of opportunity do you feel like this is going to open up for the England family that you don't have right now?
Well, and luckily we're in a nice like economic situation as a family. So these are choices that we've already been able to make. So we are homeschooling 3 of our 5 children. 2 of them go to a school that I classify as a micro school, even though they don't classify themselves as a micro school. And we're able to afford the tuition just because I'm luckily in a nice economic spot. But talking with the owners of those schools, they're like, yeah, this will be amazing. The people who are running some of these schools, they're successful when they're no longer in the red economically. And so
Right.
those are the successful schools. Those are the ones that are working. They're not necessarily making lots of money. They're making ends meet is what's happening. And so that is something that I think is really going to be helpful. We are, one of my sons is using the special needs scholarship right now to get some speech help. And so that is something. By the way, I only have one son. I said one of my sons. I only have one son. I forget sometimes how many children I have.
That's a lot to keep up with. That's a lot to keep up with. So would you say then that with the change that you're going to see, and the way this is going to impact families, then we're going to need some type of organization out in Utah for those who might be watching who are in Utah. We here in West Virginia, we have the Few. I founded this organization just over a year ago to remove barriers, guide parents, support providers. So in Utah, who should the audience be looking to for direction right now? What are the resources that are available to the Utahns that are looking to understand their options right now?
Well, I would say probably right now that's me.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that I'm stepping into. I'm going to be trying to help bring that along, help parents to understand how to navigate the scholarship application, and help providers know how to understand how to become a provider in the Utah Fits All. And so that is something that I'll be working on these next few years at least, probably for a lot longer beyond that. But that's something that I'm wanting to do. And so, and my wife and I, we have a podcast here in Utah where we've had you on actually, where we're trying to explore just the different options for a lot of parents, because they don't know what's out there, and sometimes it can be information overload actually. And so they get, analysis paralysis, and they don't end up having this, I don't know, like they don't make a choice because they have so much information coming into to them. And so being able to help them, maybe grow that a little bit and understand like what their options are. Oh, hey, here's something that, you say that you want this kind of an education. Here's the schools that do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I like to say I was not that homeschool mom. This is my 16th year of homeschooling, and in full transparency, I do actually have full-time help who my Rosie educates my 11-year-old and my 6-year-old right now. But when I first started, a lot of the veteran homeschooling moms would say, "Oh, all you need is a library card," and then as Pinterest got more popular, they would say, "Oh, all you need is Pinterest." I was not that mom.
Hmm.
Actually, all of that really overwhelmed me. And so, what I actually wanted was to find a mentor or
Yep.
someone who had actually walked a few steps ahead of me. They didn't need to be a decade ahead of me, but they had at least walked a few steps ahead of me and were able to kind of say, it's just like when, you have a field tour guide, or you go visit somewhere and you have somebody that's just been around, they know what restaurants to go to, what have you. So I think that kind of resonates with parents when we look at the expansion. These policy wonks get out there and they make things happen. And then the rest of us come in behind that and are like, okay, well, we'll now translate that into language that we can all understand and make sure that, it's actually doing what we intended it to do on the ground,
Yeah.
and walk alongside the parents. So before we wrap up, I would love it. Your perspective is unique in that you're coming from conventional, what I call conventional, I won't call it traditional, but conventional public education. What do you think are some of the compelling arguments from your perspective for the expansion of school choice as we look to this sweeping across the nation from your perspective of public education? What are some of the arguments that you feel really hold their own weight in expanding school choice options?
Well, I think it's obvious if you look at the news that's happened in public schools. You can look at academics, but can you also look at behavioral problems that are happening in schools? It's obvious that that model does not fit every single child. And so, what do those parents do? Some of them are in low income situations. They don't know, they don't have the money to go pay for even what I'm paying, which is really low, like $4,500 per kid's in tuition. That's not a really expensive micro school tuition price. That's really low cost. But if you're struggling to make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck, that becomes a really difficult thing for you to decide to make that change for your own kids if that's the situation you're living in. And so being able to provide them an option to say, yeah, there's this, Catholic school down the street that's doing things a little bit differently. It's a high school, but only has 17 kids per class, which is something that they pride themselves on. And so they start to work there. Or maybe it's a micro school in the neighborhood where they only go 3 days a week and it's really active because your kid doesn't like to sit still for 6 hours a day. And so all of those things, it just provides those kids that don't fit into that traditional model. I know I'm not supposed to call it traditional model, the typical model, whatever you want to call it. But the ones that don't fit into the public education model, they need somewhere to go. And right now they're just falling by the wayside and getting left behind. They just are. And so this gives the parents an option without having to wait for the schools to figure something out for them.
Right. And what would you say to the teacher who maybe is in the classroom right now and is just feeling all of those logistics, feeling that red tape each and every day, feeling those limitations? What does school choice expansion mean for a teacher?
What that means, and that's something that's near and dear to my heart as a former public school teacher, is you have an option now to go and build the school in the classroom that you want. The economics will start to work out. I'll be honest, the first year is going to be tough, but the first year for any entrepreneurial endeavor is always going to be
Yeah.
tough. And so just be prepared for that. But if you can make it through that first year and get into the second or third year, like, you will be able to have something that works. And the teachers that I've talked to have gained that love of teaching and learning back that they seem to have lost when they were just there behind all the red tape that maybe is in the bureaucracies that is public education. So
Right.
that has just been something that's just made me really excited actually about the direction that education is going, because it is good for teachers too, even though there's not as many examples as we can pull. So.
Well, for our audience, if they are looking to learn more about your work there in Utah, where's the best place to find John England and to learn more about the work that you're doing there in Utah?
Well, I probably spend way too much time on Twitter, but that's probably the best place to connect with me and follow the work that I'm doing. I post about it almost every day.
Okay.
So they can follow me at Twitter at jengland1226. That's
Okay.
my Twitter handle. So they can find me there. They can also go to the Libertas website, libertas.org, and see some of the articles I've written and things like that. But yeah, Twitter is probably the best place. That's the place that I unfortunately really enjoy being on. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm snarky too, but who knows?
Well, and it's the one place that I can't operate or function in because I can't keep it to those limited characters, and I can't talk with my hands well enough to keep it all on Twitter. So, thanks, John, so much for sharing about your work. This has been great, and I look forward to having this resource to even share with others that we come across that maybe are coming from a public school classroom and are looking for ways that they can kind of reduce that red tape, the bureaucracy, and figure out some more freedoms to better serve families. So thanks so much for sharing. And I'm sure that I will see you at another conference where you will be speaking on a panel, or maybe I will be, and we'll keep that competition going between Utah and West Virginia for the expansion of options. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Jamie. It's always good to talk to you.
Absolutely.